Good afternoon. Welcome to part two, slightly delayed, but these things are way of life. I'm very pleased to introduce a fellow member of the Korea Stamp Society, Professor James Grayson, who is going to kick off the philatelic part of the event. So over to you, James.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here. I've been thinking about this ever since I was asked to give you a talk. And I'm going to be talking philatelically, not in terms of history. Now, my own background is I am both a Methodist minister, I'm also an anthropologist by academic training, and I lived for continuously for about 16 years in South Korea before I joined the academic staff at the University of Sheffield at the School of East Asian Studies. But I am interested in stamps. Now, what we're going to be talking about this afternoon is an underappreciated government document, because postage stamps are government documents. They're issued by governments or some kind of postal authority. They have obviously had a design, they have a message or a purpose, and they've been produced in a certain kind of way. So what we're going to be looking at this afternoon is these government documents called postage stamps from Southern Korea and Northern Korea, and I'm deliberately using those terms because we have a period before the establishment of the two states. So we'll be looking at these government documents, and we're going to be looking at them using what is called semiotic analysis, which is a very big way of saying look at the design of the stamp and the particular topic of the stamp and look at its meaning. So we'll be examining that. Now, before we begin, I know this it's always very difficult when you're talking to a general audience. You'll find people who are specialists in certain areas, of which I know a little, and sometimes as a general audience. So if you'll accept my apologies for perhaps speaking to generally. You'll be very familiar with this, I'm sure, but it's useful to remind ourselves of just where geographically Korea is. It obviously is a peninsula joining the East Asian mainland, but it does so in Northeast Asia, and it does so in an area which is north of the wall. So you can say that this is outside of China proper, however one wants to define that. And indeed, large areas of Manchuria was, of course, claimed by pre-modern Korean states. But it's just useful to see that Manchuria and the Korean peninsula are in between Japan, China, Russia. And that, of course, influences the geopolitics of modern and pre-modern Korea. Now, just a very brief timeline of modern Korean history. The Kingdom of Chosun, of course, was the last royal dynasty. And I like to remind our students when I taught a general module in Korean history that when the founding king Lee Tae-jo of Chosun was on the throne, the Plantagenets still had 100 years to run or their descendants, in Britain. And when they left the throne, the House of Windsor, as it was to be, was on the throne. And just think of how much British history is encompassed by this one Korean dynasty. I remember talking with a Chinese friend one time and said, you know, there really were only 3 Korean dynasties. And he said, 3? If you think of Chinese history. Anyway, that's just a useful background. Also, 1905, the Russo-Japanese War, one of the effects of that was the creation of a protectorate over Korea before the full annexation of the state in 1910, which lasted for 45 years. So whether you date Japanese dominance from 1895, the Sino-Japanese War, 1905, the Russo-Japanese War, or the annexation, Japan has played a very important part there until, of course, the 15th of August 1945 with the surrender. And again, we've talked a great deal about the importance of the parallel, creating 2 zones of occupation, not unlike what happened in Europe, and the eventual establishment at slightly different dates in 1948 of the two states. And then, call it Civil War, whatever, the Korean War, 1950-1953. So that's just a bit of background. Now, again, just to remind you about the peninsula, here you can see the 38th parallel, and basically, as has been said several times, the boundary line between, the effective boundary between North and South Korea is the Armistice line of 1953 rather than the actual line, because you can see this large parts of North Korea prior to the war are now South Korea, and a little bit in the reverse. Now, talked about semiotics and in terms of stamp design. And basically, I'm following David Scott, who was at Trinity College Dublin, who followed the Peirce, an American philosopher who talked about semiotics and symbolism. And he uses the word sign. And Scott talks about three types. Looking at the design of a postage stamp, you can think of three different things. There's what he calls the index. That is basically, this is the feature on the design of the stamp that tells you what it is. It's a postage stamp as opposed to a revenue stamp, as opposed to a tax stamp or whatever. It originates from a specific country, and it has a specific purpose. That is, it's a postage stamp or for ordinary mail, parcel mail, air mail, whatever. By the way, can you name a country that does not have its name on its stamps? Yes, please. Pardon? That's the one I was looking for. But I think it's interesting. That because Britain was the first, who needs to identify the country? Everybody else has to. It's a little like the United States with the email addresses. Okay, icon. This is basically what we mean by the main image. And it has all kinds of different themes. Often, not always about the nation itself, but quite often it has other things. And North Korea, of course, is famous for talking about things that have nothing to do with Korea, North or South. And I knew the Director General of Korea Post some years ago. And he said that there was a government policy then that South Korean stamps never showed anything that had nothing to do, if they didn't have something to do with Korea. So you could have plants, you could have mushrooms, you could have flowers, you could have bridges, you could have this, but they had to be Korean. Even if they were in the north, they had to be Korean. So, symbol. This is an emblem or something that stands for the nation and appears on stamps. A symbol may form part of the index. And this is something interesting because the icon on a British principal stamp called definitive is, of course, the monarch. And also, that's the symbol. So here you have no name of state. The icon is the symbol. It's a very simple design, but because Britain was first. Anyway, let's begin. Oh, sorry. Let's look at a bit of philatelic vocabulary for the non-philatelists. A definitive stamp is the basic stamp or series of stamps issued. And a commemorative stamp, of course, is something that is there to commemorate a special event or theme, which may or may not have anything to do with the nation. So, definitive, commemorative, and of course, first issues. First issues, there's a whole collectors club on this, of which I belong. A first issue, I have interpreted to mean the very first stamp or series of stamps that a country issues when it issues a stamp. But you can look at that in another way. If there's a change of government, a revolution, a communist revolution, or the reverse, what do they put on after that? So this is a wide area. For this talk, we're going to talk about first issues, not just as the very first set of stamps, but this first set over the developmental period, 1945 liberation, to the period after the immediately after the Korean War. Those I'll call the first issues. So that's my definition for this talk. So the very first thing we have to look at is here we have, this is from Southern Korea, we have a Japanese definitive stamp which has been overprinted. Now this is very common if you think of Free State issues in Ireland after the establishment of the Free State. They took George V stamps and overprinted it. I mean, that was a very common phenomenon. So here you have Chosun Upyo, and it's a Samship Jun, 30 Jun. Now, the interesting thing about this is the same thing for those first Irish Free State stamps is it's in Korean script. Now, every one of those syllables could be written in a Chinese character, but they're not. So this is telling us something. This is a statement of nationalism. Now, obviously, the American government, the military government, didn't understand all these things, but they obviously had advisors who did. So it was important that when they had to have something to indicate the new government, the change of political affairs on the South, they put these Korean alphabetic script on the stamp. Not Chinese characters, which they could have. And keep that in mind for some of the other issues we're going to see. Now, look at this stamp. This is the first set of definitives, in fact, I suppose you could say, issued by the government of Southern Korea at the time. This is what I will call a trilingual stamp. If you look at the index across the top, it says reading from right to left, Haebang Chosun. Whereas the one that we saw just before had it reading left to right, Chosun. So here you've got Haebang Chosun, and then at the bottom it says, again reading from right to left, Kinyam Upyo. Now the reason it's reading right to left is the same reason why they do this in Taiwan with Chinese characters. Chinese characters are always read right to left, even if they're done in columns. Now the next thing that's interesting about this stamp is it gives you the value of the stamp. At the top there in that little symbolic element, it says Ojun, 5 Jun. It's in Korean script, but it's written in columns like Chinese characters. So you get these interesting kind of plays of cultural heritage. Then on the lower left-hand column, you have in sort of English or certainly Latin script, 5 Jun, or CN, I think it is. And then you have this in column form, Ojun in Chinese characters. So this is basically a trilingual stamp reflecting the sort of culture of the nation. But the actual icon is the interesting thing because it's in a format that you don't usually see in South Korean stamps. This is a sort of type of imagery I would personally have expected from sort of Stalinist Soviet Union. Here you have heroic figure holding forth the flag, fluttering, looking into the future. But of course this is liberation because it's saying liberated Korea, Haebang Chosun, liberated Korea, is holding forth the flag. But now notice the imagery. He's in Western clothing. The collar is open. The sleeves are rolled up. So this is modernity and effort, hard work, persistence. But behind, you have his wife and their child in traditional Korean clothing. So here in this imagery, you've got the idea of liberation, freedom, new opportunity, hard work, modernity, and keeping to tradition. It's an incredible image when you think about it, and it's all, in a sense, also sort of foreshadowed by the use of the different kinds of scripts and the way the scripts are written. Now, what did North Korea issue? Well, as far as I know, I've never been able to see that there are any overprinted North Korean stamps like the one that we saw. I don't know. Tony, you're saying you don't know. I can't think of anything. If it was in some place in a corner somewhere which we don't have any records of. But look at well, first of all, look at the script at the top. The first two basically are versions of the same theme. You've got the Rose of Sharon, and across the top in one it says, Chosun Upyo. Look at the middle one. It's slightly different. Choshan Upyo. If you can see, it has two little extra lines on Cho and two extra lines on Sun, Choshan. Well, of course, it indicates that there hadn't been an agreement settled yet about how to write these things orthographically, because this reflects two different forms of pronunciation. You used to, if you look at older, that is, late 19th century documents, early 20th century material written in Korean, using, that is, the Hangul script, you get this sort of variation. It just hasn't settled down. The Rose of Sharon, as an image, could have appeared on any South Korea, a Southern Korean stamp. Now, look at the bottom. There you've got the value of the stamp. On the right, you have the value of the stamp given. It's, let's say, 25 jun and 20 jun. It's in Chinese characters. The first Southern Korean stamps used Hangul. So that's different. Also, they're using the numerals that can't be monkeyed with. These are the things that you would have used if you were writing a check to be sure that they can't be forged. So they're using that. And then they've got the Arabic, quote, numeral, and some other funny number, letter that I've not been able to identify, but I think it is the Cyrillic letter ch for chun. I think I actually talked with you about this at one point, Tony. But I think that's what it is. It's some kind of stylized version. Now look at the next one. That also says Choshan Upyo. So again, like the middle one, but different from the one on the left. And again, you notice the value, 50 jun, is given in Chinese characters, and on the left in what I'm going to call a Cyrillic script. I think that's what it is. I can't think of anything else it would be, but that's what I'm assuming. So we come up to the first anniversary of liberation. How is this represented north and south? Here we have this large horizontal stamp with this dove. It actually looks more like a magpie, but I'm going to say it's a dove. Magpie actually is folklorically has a very good meaning in Korean. If you're setting out on a journey, on the first thing you see is a gachi, a magpie, everything will go right. So whether it's a dove or a gachi, magpie, it doesn't matter. And with an olive branch in its mouth. And it's flying in towards the East Asian mainland where the Korean peninsula is lit up, but you can make the outlines of China, which of course would have been the Republic of China at this time. So here you are, peace is coming to the East Asian mainland with the establishment of the Republic of Korea, or of Korean liberation. Now look, they're reading Haebang. Remember, before it was right to left, now it's left to right. Haebang il Junen. We now say il Ju. Not U, but U. It's U here. Il Junen Kinyam. So even here, it hasn't quite settled down, because if it's Ju there, you would have thought it was a Cho and Shun, but it doesn't. So it just shows at this point they weren't still quite sure, settled down about spelling, which is not surprising because Korean had been forbidden to be used during the latter part of the colonial period, and certainly things teaching it and teaching correct orthography would have been something they considered. So that's all reflected on the two sets of stamps that we have here. And again, you've got the 50 CH, and you notice how they just have two lines. I think it's actually a poorly written H for 50 Jeon. And it's listed under the bottom at the top there, Oship Jeon in Hangul. So again, Hangul not Chinese characters. Now, this, when I first saw it at a stamp auction, I lusted to buy this, truly, until I saw what the price tag was. And as a young lecturer at Sheffield University, I decided I was not going to imperil my family's livelihood to purchase this. But this is an absolutely fascinating stamp. The stamp from the Southern Korea, remember that's Southern Korea, not the Republic of Korea. Southern Korea deals with the images of peace, doves and light and that sort of thing. This stamp identifies or establishes the authority of a leader. It's a very different sort of image. But look at what the image is. You've got Cho, Sun, Upyo. Now look at the kind of the script. Sort of funny. Well, that's an imitation of what is called seal characters, the very ancient form of writing Chinese characters. So they've sort of imitated that style in the way they wrote it. In the middle, they have the Rose of Sharon. Now, first of all, I should have pointed this out on the Japanese definitive stamps, because before the end of the Second World War, all Japanese stamps had the imperial chrysanthemum in the center with the name of the state on either side. Here you've got the same sort of imagery, but in place of the chrysanthemum, the mugunghwa, the Rose of Sharon. And here we have the dramatic leader. Now remember, the very first definitive stamp from South Korea shows an iconic, symbolic figure holding forth the Korean flag. He's not a person as such, he's an everyman type of character. Here we have the heroic leader looking off, slightly turned head toward the left. Same sort of imagery. Looking into the future, the head is raised, the eyes are looking into the future. So creating the imagery. Notice he's wearing Western clothing. This is actually taken from a photograph of when he first went into Pyongyang and addressed the people in Pyongyang. But what is he doing to assert his authority? Behind his head, of course, is the Taegukgi, what we now think of as the South Korean flag, but of course it was the Korean flag. And the Rose of Sharon, of course, is, we think of the South Korean flower, well, it was just a commonly appreciated symbol, certainly during the colonial period. So you've got those two things. But notice all the other writing, other than the writing identifying the state, is in a foreign script. You have the value on the right given in Chinese characters, on in the left in Cyrillic. And here we have clearly Chen. And then reading, again, it's reading right to left in Chinese characters, and again, identifying the script there, Hebang Iljunyan Kinyam, all the way across in the top line in Chinese script, and then the exact date below, again in Chinese characters. So it's a trilingual stamp asserting the authority of this young visionary leader and backed up with the authority of what you now associate as the symbols of South Korea. So again, a very interesting stamp. Southern Korea again. A state was officially established on the 15th of August 1948. Look at these. Again, these are very big stamps, vertical stamps. These are, again, sort of bilingual because you've got both Latin script and mainly Hangul, but we have a name change. Right at the top it says Taehan Nimguk Upyo, postage of the Republic of Korea. So we have a name change here with the establishment of the state. And again, we notice the numbers on the left, Sawon is given in Hangul, but it's given colonially as if it were Chinese characters. And then same thing for the Arabic Latin script for one, Sawon. Now here you have, again, they use this imagery of the dove of peace. You notice it also has an olive branch in its mouth. It's raising its wings as if it's about to set off in flight, bringing peace. And in the background are the clouds, which are vaguely representative of the kind of cloud imagery you see, say, on the Koryo dynasty ceramics. It's that sort of style. And in the bottom it says Jongbu Surip Kinyon, the commemoration of the establishment of the government. Now, you've got the date in the lower left-hand corner, but look at the top. This is the first time you will see this. It says Korea. So this is making an assertion. This government is the Korean government. And actually, North Korea, Tony, you'll have to correct me, but I don't think North Korea uses the word DPR Korea, which they never use Korea, DPR Korea. I don't think that appears until the 1970s. I don't think, I don't think any time during the 50s or 60s.
Only in Hamburg, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
only South Korea, only the ROK. So they, of course they can say this because they had the United Nations supervised elections and so on. But that's a clear statement. Again, look here, Rose of Sharon again. We've seen this in how many different places? Again, we've got the number Ojun, but here written literally left to right. And same with the 5-1 up there. Government saying Taehan Mingugupyo. Same thing with the date on the lower right. The name across the establishment of the government. But again, very clearly sort of boxed Korea. This is what they did in South Korea. North Korea, rather. Again, very long name at the cross, name at the top, Chosen Minjujuwi Inmin Konghoguk, and then Jungan Jongbu Surip Kinyon, establishment, Kinyon of the establishment of the central government, the DPRK. But look at this image. This is, to my mind, very Soviet, with your sort of grains framing. You have the star at the top with the light coming down, lightening the north with the date. And the flag is in the center, and poor old Southern Korea doesn't have any light. So they look at these. There are all kinds of interesting aspects. These are two of the most interesting documents, I think. The left-hand one commemorates the 5th anniversary of liberation, which of course is the 15th of August. This was issued on the 20th of June, 1950. Precisely 5 days before North Korea invaded the South. You have here the Haebangtop, the Tower of Liberation given by the Soviets, spreading its light from the star above. Clearly, this was intended to indicate not the final bit of the liberation, I think. If you make a stamp, you have to think about it. You have to think about the design. You have to be sure that you've got the apparatus to print it with, the materials to print it with, even if you can't distribute it. So there's a point there. And then, 10th of July, something showing that what we call the Jongangchong, the central government building. And it says here, on the sort of curved line, Seoul Haebang Kinyon. The liberation of Seoul, with the red flag flying above. These are important documents from right around the beginning of the Korean War. However, as we have seen, the tide of war changed. And by November, the United Nations forces and the Republic of Korea forces had virtually occupied, well, very significant parts of this northern territory. So on your left, there are 3 stamps issued on this day. One shows a cameo portrait head-on of Lee Sung-man, President Lee Syngman-rhee. At the top of it, it says Gukdo Tongil Kinyon. The commemoration of the unification of national territory. And again, you've got, of course, the olive branches around it, but the Rose of Sharon filling in the blank spaces. And on the lower right-hand corner, you have Korea. Again, making a very clear statement. This stamp, the big vertical one, again says the same title, National Territorial Liberation or Unification. And you have the Taegukgi, the national flag, flying above another symbol of Korea, which is the Chanji, or the heavenly lake at the top of the crater, in the crater lake of Paektusan. And beneath that, you have the date in the Tangi year, date from the first of the foundation of Tangun, the mythical founder of Korea. So here you have three things. You have the symbol of where Tangun is supposed to have been born from his father, who, as the son of heaven, had descended to this lake. You have the year of his birth, you have his place of his birth, and you have the national flag all flying together. So you have these three symbols. So from a very early state, the Republic of Korea linked itself to the Tangun myth, but the myth was always about the people, never about a person. And the next flag is international recognition. Korean Peninsula speaks for itself. The UN flag, the Korean flag, again, national territorial unification, and very clearly stated Korea. Well, we come to the end of the war. And my question now is, what imagery do you think South Korea will put on its very first stamp after the end of the Korean War? Does anybody want to take a guess? Okay. The 50th anniversary of the founding of the YMCA. Now, this is interesting for two reasons. One, they didn't go for a political statement. And secondly, and I've done a recent article in a journal about 75 years of the representation of religion in stamps north and south. South Korea has stamps that not only show the historical depth of religion, that is part of our great history, you know, Buddhist imagery, temples, objects, but actually promotes religious things. And here we have the promotion or the commemoration of a religious body. And you've got the name at the top, Taehan Minguk Upyo, in Korean, and for the first time, the symbol of the Republic of Korea, which is the Taegukgi, the yin-yang symbol. Now, that appears on most, but not all, subsequent stamps. And it's down the side, you have the Tangi date, 4236 to 4286, 50th anniversary. And then on the side it says, Daehan Kidokyo Cheongnyeon Kinyam Hyepwe. And then it says on the bottom, the 50th year of the establishment, and the symbol in Korean of the YMCA. Final stamp. This is what North Korea, this is sort of more of what you would expect. And many of us who collect Korean stamps know this, but it's very Stalinistic, to my mind, drawing on some very interesting European images, issued the day after the Armistice was signed. Here you have this cameo portrait of Kim Il-sung as if he's a Roman emperor, which is where that imagery, I think, comes from. And at the top, it celebrates the victory of the great Korean people. And here you have imagery of soldiers and workers and a woman in Korean clothing celebrating the great victory. But notice now, all the script is in Korean. It's not using Chinese characters now. So you've got one in Korean, not Chinese. So, that is, as every Korean film in my day used to do, and good, the end. Thank you. Thank you.